Welcome to How Slimming World Builds Brand Value with Content Marketing, a visible marketing webinar in association with ZenShare. My name is Morag Cuddiford-Jones and I'm your moderator this afternoon. I'm a marketing journalist and consultant editor here at Visible. Today, we're joined by James Naylor from Slimming World and Ian Truscott from ZenShare, who will discuss how James is using technology to enable content marketers and how Slimming World are engaging customers across platforms. They'll share their experience of the shift towards content marketing, brand publishing, and their thinking on how you can help the creatives in your team create. Just before we start, let me tell you about how you can interact with us today. You're in listen-only mode, and we're really keen to hear any comments or questions you have throughout the session, so please use the questions pane to submit these to us at any time. We're also monitoring a Twitter hashtag, which is #EngageWithContent. So feel free to interact with us on Twitter as well. Lastly, we are recording this webinar, so you will be sent a copy to watch on demand within the next 24 hours. With that, we'll get started. So hello, James, and hello, Ian.
Hi, Morag.
Hello.
Hello. I think we're going to kick off with you, Ian, so I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to our webinar, How Slimming World Builds Brand Value with Content Marketing. Thank you for the introduction, Morag. The two of us, myself and James, will take you through this webinar. I'm Ian Truscott, I'm Global VP of Marketing for ZenShare. We're a software company, a vendor that, a content management vendor who produces a product called Universal Smart Content Management. We're a fast-growing vendor founded in 2001, and I'm sitting out in a Munich office right now. We have global clients and partners, and we mainly provide a universal smart content management platform that our clients use as a digital asset management, a PIM, MRM system, web content management system. And as I said, we have global clients across the world, including Christie's, Dyson's, Kohl's, Lufthansa, Hertz Magazines, and our media group, and James from Slimming World, who's joining us today. And what I want to talk about today is there's with the rise in content marketing and the statistics around how much content people are engaging with, the Forrester, I think, report that 11 content items are touched by each buyer before they make a buying decision. We're also all passionate now about content marketing. We understand that we need to create stories around our products, and there's this explosion of content need. We're also creating relevant stories and personalization, all of which are creating this need for content that we need to satisfy. And now, of course, people are engaging with brands with their hearts as well as their heads. And the story around a product, around your service, around your brand is almost as important as the product itself in order to reach this audience through the fog of digital disruption that we see today. This means that as marketers and as brands, we're all now publishers and media companies. You'll see this happening with large brands now acquiring media companies or creating media organizations within their brands. And all of us as marketers, large or small, B2B or B2C, are all needing to become publishers as we need to focus on who the audience is, how we write relevant content for that audience, and how we engage with them. Morag, I think we now have a poll about that.
We do, fantastic. We are going to run a quick poll so that we can gauge where you're at with your content marketing. And we simply want to know how developed is your content marketing operation. The options you can choose from are: we're just getting started, we're establishing ourselves, we're maturing, or we're a fully fledged content machine. Now, fully fledged content machine sounds interesting, Ian and James. I mean, am I wrong in thinking that most people would say, well, we have a website, we possibly have a social media presence, we could probably call all that content, but is that mature content?
I think that's interesting, actually, because the definition of what is content marketing seems to vary depending on who you speak to. I mean, some people believe that their content marketing strategy is just about, like you say, publishing content to their website, or maybe trying to make a YouTube video go viral, and that's content marketing. But actually, I think that a content marketing operation or content marketing strategy is much deeper than that, and that you create a coherent story for your brand, you consider who the audience for that story is, and you create these stories for each members of these audience, and then you think about how you're going to interact with them across multiple channels. of course, our audience are, they're all on social, they're using their mobiles, they're looking at our website, they're interacting with us on LinkedIn or wherever it is, and a content marketing operation or strategy needs to encompass all of that. So I would say, to your question, Morag, it's kind of about how you would define content marketing, but I would actually give it, I think it's a mature discipline really within a marketing organization.
So it sounds fantastically complex compared to that initial scenario of website and social media that I put forward. But it's interesting to see that 47% of our attendees today say that they're maturing. Clearly, it's a topic of interest for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on this webinar. But are these results surprising to you? Are they what you'd expect?
I think that's a good spread. I think that's the experience that we have when we're talking to our clients, or if we're presenting at events that are based around this. That most people are really thinking about how to fully embrace content marketing, how to build into that the sort of personalization type functions that the consumers demand today. And I would say that's very reasonable of what we're seeing. And I think the nice thing about that question is that we're maturing probably covers a broad church of where folks can be, right? Is that I think that we're maturing is probably a good indication of where most marketers are in their content marketing operations.
Fantastic.
James?
Well, hopefully we're about to find out a bit more about that. But just to remind everyone participating in our webinar today, do keep sending in questions. Hopefully we can get James and Ian to answer some of your pressing content requests at the end of this presentation. But for the time being, I'd like to pass back to Ian for some more insights.
Thank you, Morag. I don't like to break the process, but I don't know if, James, you have a view on content marketing and where you are.
Yeah, I come to it from as a technologist, I'd come to it from a technology point of view, and listening to how you describe the state of organizations at the moment with websites and a social media team and maybe an internal communications team, and the landscape is changing so quickly that the technology is required to keep on top of it. And I think from my experience of speaking to colleagues in other organizations, I'd say that people know what they need to do, but don't have the tools yet to kind of make it happen. And so I think, yeah, the kind of the answers to that question were kind of, they'd be roughly where I'd expect people to see that they know what they need to do, and they probably need some help in bringing the systems in place to make it easier without kind of overwhelming their teams or their staff.
Well, thank you, James. And that actually leads me to my next point and my next slide, which is that it's not easy. And this is this is what we were talking about just now, Morag, is that it really does. If you think of this as just content publishing and web publishing, then it seems fairly straightforward. But then when you start thinking about your audience and you start thinking about how to segment that audience, how to engage each of those individuals in a relevant and personalized way, how your story resonates with them, how you actually then measure your ability to connect with them, how you can get that interaction going, is really not easy. And that isn't a picture of me or James, by the way. That's completely made up picture. And one of the challenges that we have is that we as organizations naturally siloed, and what I think things like content marketing and personalization and customer experience and digital experience and all these trends and marketing disciplines that we're seeing today is it's exposing the fact that our organizations were really built in the industrial age around a very straightforward a customer journey of somebody who's interested, and then they interact with us, and then they go away and they get served. Whereas now I think consumers are, as I said at the beginning, they're touching a lot more content that we produce. So people want to read the service manual for maybe for their car before they purchase the car, whereas previously that was a very standard gated customer journey. You went into the showroom, you bought the car. When you bought the car, you got the handbook, you got the service. And now people are really moving around from a content perspective, really moving around that customer journey, and that's exposing these silos within our organization, because one minute they want to talk to the service department, next minute they want to talk to sales, then they want to talk to marketing, and it isn't in that natural way that we were. And actually, I heard a very interesting point in a conversation yesterday, in that a lot of people, and a little bit ourselves, we talk about sort of busting silos or breaking down silos or moving them. And really that's very difficult in any organization because of the way that we operate as humans in this very tribal way, and the way that we traditionally have set up our businesses. So and the conversation I was having yesterday was about the fact that you need to make these silos transparent. And we would argue, obviously, as a software vendor, if you put in the right software, you can absolutely make those silos much more transparent and encourage some of that working together. So that's one of the challenges that we see with sort of bringing your whole organization to the digital experience, to content marketing. And also what we're seeing is that whereas previously, and much in the same way as you can talk about your customer journey being incredibly sort of fixed in the old days, it was very easy then to have systems that were very focused on the silo in your organization and the role that part of the organization played in the customer journey. Whereas now things are really converging. If you have for example, a product information database or a product information management database, previously that would probably have been a back office type system, and it would have contained text about a product, and maybe, excitingly enough, it might have an image in it. But now people, when they talk about product information, and if you think about what it is the consumer wants to interact with now, they want to interact with video. They want to do a 360 view of the products, and now we're talking about augmented reality. We're talking about voice and interacting with artificial intelligence. So every system now, whether you've got a product information management system or a digital asset management system or a web content management system, all of these systems are now converging in that they all play a role in the customer journey. They need to be either incredibly well integrated, or actually people are using these systems for purposes that you may have seen a bit more siloed before. And of course, that's also reflected of our processes internally. So as I was talking earlier on about silos, our processes are converging. The importance of having pixel perfect images in your product information management system becomes essential if you're then going to serve those into your brochure, or you're then going to serve those to your website or on social. And the digital rights management around those things, and all of the governance around publishing content, you need to be on point in every part of your business, because mistakes get made. And when mistakes get made these days, they are quickly highlighted on things like social media, and then there's a feeding frenzy, or you get sued or something like that. So these systems and processes around content management and marketing are converging. And so this is really the end of my particular pitch, representing, I guess, a digital experience platform vendor in this. So I thought that this is a good point to hand over to James. So James, as an expert, how do you do it?
Thanks, Ian. I'm glad you called me an expert. I don't get called that much during the office hours of 9 to 5. But just to give you a quick introduction to myself, I'm James Naylor. I spent the last 11 years working at a large publisher, Hearst Magazines, looking after approximately 20 monthly and weekly magazine titles. I started as an editorial support person, so helping our creative teams use their tools, whether they were computers or applications, in the most effective way possible. And say this was many years ago, before the kind of explosion of systems that we have today. As part of that team, we helped to implement an asset management system, a DAM system, and then from DAM we moved on to workflow. And then the workflow tools grew so powerful and sentient that they didn't need me anymore, and I moved on. I've recently moved to Slimming World, which is the country's largest and most successful weight loss organisation. My role there starts with the magazine publishing team, so a very kind of similar role with many fewer titles. But what I can hopefully bring to this discussion today is talk you through some of my experience so far of bringing those systems in at the large publisher, and then also what we're looking to do in a more vertical fashion at Slimming World using the same systems. So my role at Slimming World is to look after their content creation and management processes, bring some structure and organisation to it. It's been a very interesting move going from a magazine company to a publishing function inside a membership organisation, and it's kind of given me some really interesting insights into what we can do with our tools that that previously were probably kind of hidden away from me. The pictures in my presentation are not going to be particularly useful when taken away, but hopefully they'll give you an idea of some of the direction of what we're talking about. So the next slide is a riff on the saying to man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, something like that. But to me, it's a chisel gives you a stone tablet, and this is how we used to do it in the old days, as it were. And the old days is only a couple of years ago, and hopefully some of you will recognize this. Word documents on a file server, Word documents with manual markup inside that say please check this in brackets, or headline to go here, or please check this fact. These files were kept on a file server. They were kept in folders that some people had access to and some people didn't. They were also kept under file names that gave some indication of the versioning, and they might say version 2, they might say version 3, they might say version do not use this version. And lots of people communicate via email around those same documents. So there's a whole kind of shadow conversation about the assets that are being created within the organization. So these processes were incredibly messy and convoluted, and the final result from a magazine perspective was effectively a stone tablet, something that wasn't reusable, wasn't easily shareable. It did look beautiful, and we could control it to the dot, so it had that going for it. But for the modern kind of internet age, it wasn't particularly fit for purpose. But now, as the next slide will show you, content is consumed everywhere. And the world of content that we're working in today is so much more complex than it used to be. So people might be writing a story for print. That story in print might become a web page. We might need to do a summary of that web page in a tweet. That tweet might then point back to an app version of the magazine or product that we're creating. That app might contain a long version of the story. It might contain a short version of the story. It might contain a version of the story written 3 years ago, but made evergreen in a way. And those things might link into an email newsletter, which we're using to promote the product or the organization. And that's not even to start to think about things like Facebook publishing, Google, Apple News. So all of those channels, they need content. And looking across those teams, I think that Ian talked earlier about silos, and those kind of silos exist in all organizations, and I hope that you're kind of nodding along as I speak. But trying to effectively manage your content in this internet age with the tools of effectively the stone, the bronze, and the industrial age is becoming more and more impossible. So everyone's a publisher, but content creators also need support. So supporting your content creators is step number one, and they need systems to help them to do that. And that's basically where my role comes in. And working with creative teams, the P word, process, is sometimes a dirty word, but systems can help. And when you're thinking about your content marketing endeavors and thinking about how to reuse material that's been created elsewhere, you need systems to help you know whether you can use an image again. Where has it been used before? Do we need to pay to reuse it? Does the subject approve of different uses of that information? There's a whole heap of information around your assets that needs to be captured in systems and not in people's heads, emails, or on their desktop. I've had experience in the past of people using images found in a Google image search, which were then, because they were used by one team, were then picked up by other teams and used more widely across an organization. And when the original use of that image was spotted, and it was not a legal use of that image, it was just a mistake done by somebody junior much further down the line. It became a very expensive mistake once the kind of reach got out of hand, as it were. And all of these things would be stopped, or could be at least ameliorated, if the usage of those images, assets, text, video is stored in a system with the information around it. And if you have an international reach, which I'm sure many of you do, that probably gets even more complicated. So your content creators need support to know whether they can use it before, but they also need to store the files in a way, in a structured way, so that it becomes easier to store, reuse, and repurpose. So structure is your savior. And the next slide kind of indicates that. And the chipmunk is my DAM system, and the core one are the assets. And when your copy and your video and your images are in a structured form, and your assets have got enforced and structured metadata around those assets, it massively simplifies how you can easily share that content across multiple outputs, how you can edit it once and use it abundantly across different systems, and how you can link your systems together. There are, as clever as the systems get, you will always need to interact with other systems, and being able to share them across common APIs is critical to having, and the critical part of that is having your files in structured formats. When running through the presentation, I was asked to put in an explanatory slide. So that the next one is my obligatory technical slide. And what this shows you is a kind of example of what I'm talking about here in terms of structure. The image on the left is a text document, and we've pulled out the kind of the critical parts where we need some structure. So whether we need a web title or a short title or a print title. These are examples from a few years ago, and both the technology and the interfaces have come on massively since then, but the core concept is the same. And the text in the bottom of that left-hand screenshot has tags in it so that we can indicate whether something needs to be italicized or bold or highlighted in some way, whether it's a link or not. And by having it in this format, it means that when you need to reuse it somewhere else, your technical teams, your systems guys can work on linking your systems in a way that eliminates people having to copy and paste, eliminates people having to recheck, eliminates people having to resub. The boxes on the right-hand side are more about how you can structure the information around your assets. And there's an example of keyword structure so that you can easily find content. And obviously things like machine learning and artificial intelligence are making vast strides in making this easier and easier, kind of on an almost daily basis. But again, the core concepts are the same. If you can structure the information around your assets, it makes them easier to find, it makes them easier to use, and it makes them easier to reuse. And the box on the right with the redacted information, it's not one of the Brexit white papers, but it could be an example in your organization of product information. And Ian talked earlier about PIM information. And if you can think about how you can store that information in a way that, again, is easy to store, restructure, and use. It takes information out of, certainly out of spreadsheets and out of siloed systems, brings them into your one content marketing system so that you can link together product information, up-to-date product information, with your content, your stories, your video, your text, your website. So all of these things should go into your content management and content marketing systems. That's it for technical slides, I hope. So yeah, once your files are structured, once your metadata is structured, then you can link everything together to make everything easier. But DAM is the foundation of that. And my journey at both Hearst and Slimming World starts with DAM. And DAM is probably the easiest way to calculate an ROI on your project. It's also probably the simplest part of a system to explain. And having a library inside your organization that everybody has access to, that is the single source of truth, is the key to starting on this journey of managing your content and making it easy to use. Digital asset management systems can not only just store your files in one place, you can also use it to put workflow around your assets. You can have an approval workflow. You have to build in, or should be building in, your rights management. And you can extend that out to financial information. So if you think about a photo shoot, you can bring it into your DAM as assets, but you would also want to tag it with the photographer. You would want to tag it with the stylist. You'd want to tag it with the contractual and the rights information, so that anybody within your organization who needs to use those assets can look in one place to find all of the information that they need to reuse it, without having to phone around people and find out whether they can use it, whether they need to pay to use it again. Or even worse, if they use it without asking and find out that they've done it incorrectly. And so in a system that you're looking for, you want to start with DAM, but make sure that it's extendable out into other things such as financial information, PIM information, and a couple of the projects I'm looking at the moment even include building in the internal knowledge base into the DAM, so that people who are answering queries from our members have, again, an up-to-date single source of truth of information. But the beauty of having the knowledge base in the DAM is that we can then link the assets in that DAM into the knowledge base, so that if it gets updated anywhere, everybody sees the update. Everybody always has the latest information. There's no V1, V2, there's no PDFs or Word documents flying around people's email. But the core kind of key role that I have in Slimming World and had previously at Hearst, and it's something that Ian and I have talked about a lot, is using our systems to just let your creative teams create. So within a content marketing organization, you will have content creators, and their job should be to create content in a way that resonates with the people that you're trying to reach. So enabling content creators by removing obstacles, minimizing busy work, eliminating meetings, and removing confusion about where to store stuff, and I use stuff in the most technical fashion, using workflow systems, content marketing systems, and asset management systems. This can be one or many different things, but all linked together, is the critical part of my role. Enabling people to find content and not have to copy and paste from one box into another to reuse it. Enabling people to find information and not have to worry about whether it's flagged for reuse or shouldn't be reused, or is a slightly older version of an asset that should be used across the organization. A logo library is a great example of that. So removing those obstacles, minimizing all the busy work, should be the core of your implementation of any wider content marketing system. Nobody's going to use a system that makes their lives more difficult, and your businesses shouldn't be signing off on systems that make it more complicated to use assets. So everything that we're talking about so far is about making it easier for your teams to do what they need to do. And that's where we are at Slimming World at the moment, linking together teams that were previously siloed into one system so that they can share content and know that they can use it and reuse it easily across our multiple output channels, is the start of my Slimming World technological journey. And with that, I'll hand back to Morag, who I think should have some questions.
I do. I have almost as many of my own as I have from people listening. So thank you ever so much, both James and Ian, for that. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, as a writer myself and as a creator of content too, I, as you said, let the creators create. Often I have no idea of all the things that are going on in the background to make sure that content is usable, that content is legal. That gives me pause for thought as well, to make sure that all the assets that I'm throwing around willy-nilly are actually good for use. I mean, it's an interesting thought that I was having there. Let the creators create, and trying to find you know, great ways of bringing that digital asset management together and these systems together. We were talking about maturity earlier in the poll. Do you think that some marketers and some teams are put off engaging with content as a process rather than this sort of organic willy-nilly way it sort of just happens by opening up a Facebook account and various other things, because they worry about the amount of processes they have to put in, they worry about how they're going to manage this effectively?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah.
I think perhaps the opposite is often true in a way, in that I consider content marketing to be a very considered marketing discipline that requires some strategic thought and planning and orchestration. Whereas what you find in a lot of marketing departments is that folks are really just on a kind of a hamster wheel of to use sort of some of James' imagery, a hamster wheel of just creating random acts of content based on what the business is asking for, but very sort of low-level content that isn't really helping to tell the story of the product or the brand. It's a press release about a partnership or a new product feature or something. You know, certainly if I'm talking from the B2B world, it's that kind of thing that happens. So I don't necessarily think people are fearful of creating content, but I do think that people are not considering the broader content supply chain and the broader content experience that you really want to present to the consumer. Does that make sense, Maura? Is that answering your question?
No, it makes absolute sense. And I mean, you know, dealing with content strategically, it's one of those things that I feel has somewhat come upon marketers as the ability to distribute content has matured. You know, the concept of thinking about content strategically, is that something that is taking time for perhaps not necessarily newer companies, but smaller companies perhaps who have, you know, many jobs to be getting on with already? You know, taking a step back and thinking about content strategically and what it can do for them, and therefore how they need to go about it. Is that something? It seems like an initial stage, but it seems to me like that's a big challenge for many people to get over.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's. Sorry, James.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you mentioned kind of small companies who've got lots to do day to day, but I think it's just as much of a problem in larger companies where the silo effect takes more of an impact, where teams are not necessarily talking to each other. They have their own plans and their own schedules, content, marketing processes, and using a system to bring all of those together on a kind of a more holistic way across the entire organization is something that you should be looking at putting in place with your system, so that you have kind of long-term plans within your long-term project plans within your system, which are linked to the assets, which are linked to the financial and the rights information, and that everybody can see everything, which is a very scary and different place to be for some people. But I think it's definitely the direction that things are going in.
And from my perspective on that, and this is why I enjoy working with folks like James, who have this. I mean, the publishing industry already has this at the core of them, is thinking about the consumer of the content. And I think there's a lot to learn as marketers if we think like publishers, if we focus on what is of interest to the consumer of our content, rather than thinking about what is of interest to us to get across. What is our products, ourselves, our brand. Actually, if we think like publishers, if we think like James and his organization, we can create a much better content experience for our consumers, because we're thinking about them. We're not thinking about ourselves.
Fantastic. Well, sorry, James, do you want something to add?
I was going to say that there's a lot to be said about the kind of the rigor that is enforced by a publishing cycle, and whether that's a weekly or monthly or a bi-monthly cycle of thinking ahead of the work that you need to create and who it's targeted at. And there's a lot to be said for kind of putting that in place in other parts of the organization too.
Fantastic. As I said, I'm going to get onto the questions in a minute, but there's just one other thing that has been ticking away in my head while I've been listening. We're talking about systems. We mentioned, Ian, you mentioned at the very beginning about the fact that we do tend to be siloed organizations. We're set out along lines that aren't necessarily compatible with our new digital and content-led age. But along with the word silo, I often find in my day-to-day interviews is the word legacy. And companies have a ton of systems in place that, just as the silos and the departments don't talk to each other, nor do the systems. And talking about getting these sort of centralized asset management systems in place and these reserves of information, the financial information, etc. How easy is that to bolt on to what people have in place? So there'll be people listening going, this all sounds great in theory, but I have this creaking legacy IT system and I'm not entirely sure where I put all of this.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question to ask me as a software vendor, because I obviously have a very obvious answer to that, which is to come and talk to us at SendShare, right? But to answer your question a little bit more seriously, I think that we've talked to different clients, and they take varying approaches with these things. And some folks start very small, and they'll start, as James was talking about, sorting out a digital asset management solution, and then centralizing all the digital assets, and then really creating a kind of a library of content within their organization that then becomes the single source of truth for those kinds of assets. And then growing out from that, they then start to store more of the complex product information, or they start to then serve directly from these systems to their systems of engagement, if you like, things like their website and their social channels and things like this. So you can build a very progressive digital transformation program. But you can actually start relatively small. I mean, these things are transformative pieces of technology, so they do require some commitment. But you can start from that sort of fairly small digital asset management solution, and then build a program that then starts to bring in some of the functions or some of those integrations that you talk about.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. I'm sure that will reassure some listeners who are going, well, where do I get going with this? One of the questions harks back to what you were just talking about, both of you, in terms of making sure you're putting out the right kind of content. The question is quite simply, how do I find out what my customers want?
I don't know if, James, you want to take that question as a publisher. I can certainly have a stab if you like.
I'd rather you have a stab at that one, because I'm more a technical person.
There's an incredibly simple answer to that one, Morag, and that is you speak to them. We talk about things like social media monitoring and all the sophisticated tools that you can do, and you can find out what's in the zeitgeist of your industry. You can find out what other people are talking about that are in your industry. You can find out the adjacent subjects of people that are interested in your content are also interested in these other pieces of content, and you can align yourself to that. There's a lot of sophistication around that sort of thing that you can do through analytics, big data, and all those lovely buzzwords. But I think the key thing is actually just to talk to people. Recently, we're going through a process ourselves. We're taking a look at our own web publishing, and what we did a process where we just ask people to record their thoughts and their experience of using our website. And when you get the unfiltered feedback from your content consumers, it's incredibly enlightening. And I would encourage people just to speak to their content consumers and find out what they care about.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're very fortunate as a membership organisation at Slimming World with a very wide social media reach, whether that's Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, with lots of very, very engaged members who love to share their stories and sharing their journeys as inspiration for others, and also to kind of keep them on track. So we have lots of touch points, and on the magazine side, feedback is kind of built into the process. We hear back from our readers, and we'd know if we were doing something wrong, if the kind of the circulation declined or something like that. So there's many different ways of, as you say, just talking to the people that you're trying to reach.
And I think, James, that's a good lesson for any organisation, including ours. I mean, we're a B2B organisation, and you could easily hide behind Google Analytics and track numbers, but actually, people want to hear from people like them. So the stories you talk about, James, in terms of other people who are slimming, it's the same for us, really. I mean, people want to hear from you, James, about how you're transforming your business with a digital asset management solution. And for us, that's just the best kind of content, you know. So if you then engage with your customers and find out what they care about, they will actually share their story, and you can share their story, and that's what your audience wants to hear about. They don't want to hear from you. They want to hear from you know, your friends and the people that can vouch for you.
Fantastic.
And bring it back into the system point of view, you can track that and record it within the systems that you're using to manage your assets as well. So it's very circular.
Yeah. Morag, we're the worst people to moderate. I do apologise.
Sorry, yeah.
So they're chucking out great content, and I get to sit here and just listen. It's great because you're now doing my DJ job for me, and I'm going to seg beautifully into the next question because James and Ian, you've both touched on it. James, you were talking about the fact that you'd soon hear about it if you were getting it wrong via social media, etc. We have another question here, which basically comes at it from the other side: is how do we know if content is successful? I mean, it's one of those things. An article, a blog post doesn't always directly correlate to money in the till. It's it's not a one step beyond kind of deal. No,
and that's kind of where it's probably a step beyond my my kind of expertise level and remit. But tracking the analytics that Ian was talking about earlier, whether that's Google or Facebook or Twitter, to find out what people are doing with your content is kind of key, and that kind of sentiment analysis is really important to find out whether you're on the right track or not. I say there's no kind of magic bullet in this. But if you can use your systems to kind of generate this kind of long-term plan of messaging, and that your content then feeds into that long-term plan, then you'll know very quickly if you're on the right track, or whether you need to tweak what you're doing.
Yeah, and I concur with you, James. I think that well, one of the other challenges, of course, is I mean, metrics. We could do another webinar about marketing metrics and what are the best ones to use and how best to figure this stuff out. And one of the things that I've been talking about quite a lot recently is that it's very easy to get distracted by the sort of vanity metrics of the popularity of your content on your website, or the number of followers you have, or likes and all that kind of stuff. And if you then start to write content that becomes popularist, it actually becomes more, it actually could then focus less on your real audience that you want to speak to, right? So for years I've made this flippant comment that if I could improve your web analytics stats, because we'll just train a cat to play piano and put them on the homepage. You'll get a shed load of hits, but you won't get any engagement. So I think that whether your content is being successful is going to be about what is it you're trying to achieve with that piece of content. Are you trying to achieve awareness? Are you trying to achieve revenue? Are you trying to achieve trust? You know, those three things I've actually just recently written about on a blog post on our website. And you really do need to really think about how you can attribute your content production against some of those key metrics, because in my experience, and you know, I haven't been global VP of marketing for ScentShare for the whole of my life. I have actually done other roles as consultant and worked with large organizations on their content marketing strategies. And the surefire way to not succeed in driving a content marketing strategy is to not tie it to what your business is trying to achieve, what the C-level cares about. So whilst it is hard, it's very important that you attribute the success metrics for your content are linked to the success metrics for your business and of achieving those things. And it's hard to make that connection. I'm not saying it's easy, but you really must. You cannot just say, oh, I've got more web hits on my website this week. That doesn't mean to say you've got a more engaged audience. That just means you've got more people bouncing off your website, perhaps. You know, so you need to look deeply into that stuff.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to wrap up very shortly with the last two questions. I'm just going to give you a heads up that the last question I'm going to ask you to sort of summarize some initial steps for people just starting out. I thought I'd give you a warning on that one, just so that you can get the brains whirring and get them into some nice, neat bullet points. But before that, I'm going to double back and ask you one final sort of more free-flowing question, which is, I guess the point of content is to target customers, in areas they're interested in. And our customers are not a homogenous, gooey bunch of consumer. They are different people. There are segments. We talked about segments. We talked about personalization. So content isn't all just being fired out of a big content cannon and hoping where it may lie. Depending on the channel it comes through, depending on the tone of voice, depending on the type of content, snackable or long read, depends on the consumer you're aiming it at. To successfully drive that personalization, where does that come from? Can we define where it comes from in content? Can we define that is it a technology piece? Is it a data piece? Or is it simply, you know, the creativity and down to what that content is? What is going to drive the most successful part of personalization?
Good Lord, Morag, I think that is another webinar all in itself. I think we could be here for another hour.
3 webinars so far, I think. I think we're doing well.
I hope that the people that are listening are bracing themselves for the long haul. I think that's a very big question. And whether, is it about people, is it about process, is it about technology? Clearly, it's about all of those things. And I think some of the points that we've made during this webinar and some of the slides that we've had, I love James's expression, let the creatives create. And that's really the way that you need to walk back into your business about all of those pieces of friction that are stopping. If you think of this as a conversation, you have some subject matter expert inside your business that the consumer wants to speak to. How do you connect those two people together? What are all the steps that are happening in between? And it is about people. It is about having those subject matter experts. It is about having folks like James you can invite to a webinar. It's all those things, you know, and it's really kind of walking back into that. And I'm not even sure that I'm answering your question, Maura, because it was so big.
It was a rather general question, to be fair, but I think just the general concern is that, you know, a lot of the questions that you have along these lines are, you know, where do we start? It does seem like it's a lot. There is no one out there with no content at the moment. Everyone's hit on a web post. I keep harking back to the social media, but every brand out there has hit on something. So whatever they've got, they're now trying to roll back and think strategically about it. And they want to know where this strategy comes from. Is it coming from, you know, everyone's talking to me about big data. Do I forget about the creativity that I've been putting into it so far and go back and turn this into a logic exercise? Or do I just look at the technological capabilities I have and go, well, this is the tech I've got, so it's got to fit in these boxes? Or do I go, no, let the creators create, and you know, it's up to us to then figure out how to disseminate it and target it?
Well, it
depends what you want to achieve, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key point. What are you actually trying to do? What tools do you need to do to get to that point? Whether that's, as you said before, whether it's long form or snackable or creative content or machine generated targeted content. You've got to know what you're trying to achieve, whether that's and what the kind of ultimate business goal is, and then you work backwards from there. Do I have the technology to make that happen? Do I have the teams to kind of feed that creative monster of that appetite for creative content? So I think the short answer to your very first part of that question was all of the above. It's everything. You can't take these things in isolation.
Yeah, and I think more in a former life when I consulted on these things, I think there's some really nice techniques that you can employ, which is to do a kind of a maturity model or a matrix of your organization and take a look at all of these parts that you've just highlighted. You know, what is the current status of the systems, our processes, our people, where are we on on the analytics model, and think about all the things that you need, and then kind of give yourself a score, or bring a consultant in who can give you a score, and then you've got a place you need to start, right? You can see that actually it's clear our systems are our biggest impediment to make this happen, or it's clear that, you know, the way our organizations talk to each other is an impediment to making this happen. And you can start to then iteratively move forward, you know, and improve that maturity towards where you want to be as a business in terms of a digital customer experience, or content marketing, or personalization, or whatever it is that the end goal looks like, to James's point about where you're trying to get to.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I think that's rather neatly brought me down to the last question that I have for you, which was about that sort of summation of some key bullet points of how we get started. I mean, you've just mentioned the finding out your goal, setting out your goal, and then finding out what you have to answer that goal already, and therefore what you're going to need going forwards. I mean, do you have any top tips or top bullet points, or a top 5 progress that you think people should get into checking off to see how they're getting towards a mature content strategy?
Shall I go first, James?
I was going to say, from my point of view, the starting point is that mapping exercise, mapping your organization, finding out, and you probably already know who does what within the organization, but seeing it on a wall with the links of who's doing what content they're using, how they're reaching people, is the start point. And then from there you can think about the technology points, and then you can think about whether you've got the people that you need to enact what you're trying to achieve. But that kind of initial mapping exercise is where I would where I have started in previous projects.
Probably for me, I'd go back to, aside from all the sort of the other things we talked about, I'd go back to the point about thinking like a publisher. I would, you know, just try to view your own content marketing strategy, or the content you're producing today, or your website, whatever it is, through an outside-in lens, through the view of the consumer, and think about how, if you were a publishing organization and you were focused on achieving engagement with that audience, is what you're writing or what you're producing, do you think they really care about it? You know, and think about you can read a lot about this in sort of content marketing strategies, is if that content wasn't there anymore, would anybody care? Would they miss it? You know, things like that. Be quite harsh and think, does anybody care about this content? And just have a sort of a spend some time, sit back and review and look at what you're actually putting out and whether anybody really cares about it. It sounds a bit harsh, but you know what I mean.
Fabulous. Thank you. I love the idea that we're ending on the note of, does anybody really care? Thank you ever so much, both to James and to Ian. It's been a fantastic presentation. There's been so much detail in there. If you've joined us today, or if you're joining us on demand, I can just really recommend that you give this a couple of goes over, because there's so much information, so much rich idea in there for people who are embarking or in the middle of their content strategy. This webinar was brought to you by Visible Marketing in association with SendShare. Once again, the on-demand recording will be sent to you within 24 hours. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.